Today, we're diving into the art of saying no, breaking free from people-pleasing, and living life on your own terms. That's up next.
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. I'm Eric Deschamps with three special guests today. So glad to welcome back Rob Dale, my dear
I'm a special
friend.
guest?
You're a special guest today.
Nice.
No, you're not a special guest. You're here all the time. But we're joined by our significant others, Wendy Dodds and Kate Beer. We've had them on the show before, but this is the first time we've been all in studio together. And
It's going to be great.
It's going to be so good.
Very exciting.
Very
exciting.
But we're here today to talk about people pleasing. I think something that pretty much every human being on the planet struggles with at some level or another. And maybe to open it up, if we were to try to explain what people pleasing looks like, sounds like to a 10-year-old, how would we explain it to them?
What a great way to ask that. I think for me, it would be certainly we're explaining it to a 10-year-old. Boy, I only have a 5-year-old mentality, so I've already got to be.
You're having to speak up. You're having to go up the chain.
I've already got to speak up. It's when you're always thinking of others and always putting the needs and the wants of others ahead of what you need and want.
Yeah.
That it's okay to want to think about other people and this notion of not being selfish. At the same time, we often, even with kids, we teach them at a very early age that selfishness is bad. Looking after your own needs is a part of really taking care of even the needs of others.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. What about you, Wendy?
Yeah, I think if I try to explain this to a 10-year-old, in simple terms, you say yes to the things that you need to do, are required to do to make other people happy. And if you're not saying yes to that, then you're bad, or you're not a good person. So you need to be a good person. You need to do all of the things you're supposed to do. And if you're not, then you're not a good person.
Yeah. And I think you touched on this, Rob, but we teach our kids so young that to put everyone else above themselves. Certainly how I was raised, you were the quiet kid in the room. Like, that's people pleasing in itself, in its simplest form. So you're taught from a young age to not put your own needs first.
Right. So. It's like you're barely showing up out of fear that you're going to put somebody out.
Yes.
Right. So I know for me, it often showed up in not having my own voice. Again, not even thinking that my own needs were valid, right? That somehow it was selfish. And I think in the environment that Rob, you and I grew up in, we've talked about this, one of the earliest episodes when the show launched, that self-sacrifice and selflessness were held up like virtues. They were right there with godliness almost, right? And so you were always, not only did we have the human being people-pleasing thing kick in, but we had this religious overlay of you have to self-sacrifice, you have to put yourself first. And I remember coming to the conclusion last year at some point how selflessness actually, the way it's usually lived out is actual bullshit. Because when you think of being selfless, it means no self, right? So self comes absolutely last all the time.
And yet it's incredible how when you talk to people about people pleasing, one of the first things many people will say is, well, I'm not a people pleaser. Like, that's not me, because we know it's bad, the term people pleasing. But as soon as we change that language from people pleasing to selfish or selfless, immediately people then embrace, oh no, but I am selfless. And in most cases, we don't make the connection that in so many situations, they're the same thing. The idea of, again, being selfless is the same as people pleasing. And so one bad, it all depends on the words, right? One is
matters.
bad, we don't
Words
like
matter.
it, and one is always a virtue. And so that's what keeps people kind of in the trap of always people pleasing, is because they're using the wrong language to identify what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Where does it show up for you guys the most?
Ugh. Yeah, I think
We could write books on this.
I'm in on that one. I think for women, I think there's a bit of a different dynamic. I think women tend to put themselves last a lot. Like we're always, if you have kids or your parents are aging or your partner, whoever, our friends, we put everyone else first, thinking we're doing good, thinking we're helping because we want to, but we're not filling our own cup. And so, what I've learned is if I don't fill my cup, I can't show up in a way that helps them because I'm depleted and I'm in that space of I'm drained. So they're not getting the best version of myself, but we're not taught that it's okay to fill your cup.
Right.
And so for me, I know, being a woman often, it's just that tendency at young age, we're taught everyone else's needs come before ours consistently.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's like you end up showing as like a fraction or a shadow of your true self because you're operating on fumes half the time. You're barely making it and you're trying to help other people. Jason Spears, who was on the show not long ago, talked about living his whole life trying to help others while secretly like just suffering and despising himself because his life was just on empty all the time.
Yep. Well, and I think that's what society teaches us. And I think social media, as much as we love what it does, it's also very much a double-edged sword because everywhere you look, it's, do more, serve more, help more, which, give gratitude more, all of the things that we know we're supposed to do. And to Kate's point, especially from a woman's perspective or being a mom, and it's funny, I was talking to Dr. Sherry about this a couple of weeks ago. When you think about having a cup that you want filled for yourself, but then you're continuously putting holes in your cup and then trying to duct tape it and patch it up, and everything just keeps leaking out.
Right.
But I've said this quote before, and I think you'll probably relate to it as a mom too, Kate. Outward smiles, inward screams, right? It's the masks that we wear to say yes, 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 but on the inside you're dying because you just don't want to be yes anymore.
Yeah. I think for me, where it often shows up, and I saw this for so many years, was because I got validation. I was when I did, kind of was pleasing people, keeping people happy, doing all the things, running around, taking care of other people's needs before my own. I would get all these comments back about you're such a good person, you're so kind, and you're such a wonderful person. And so because I wasn't loving myself or giving myself that validation, it caused me to almost become addicted to the behavior because of the response I got and the validation I got as a result of it.
Well, Kelly Flanagan would say that that's a form of shame. When he was on the show, he talked about this notion that we often think of shame as bad things we say to people and we shame them, right? Because they made a mistake, or we shame them because of how they show up. But another form of shame is, when I act this way, you like me more. Right? Or I'm more popular, or I seem to get more acceptance. And so to your point, we end up chasing that validation. But that is toxic fuel. I mean, you chase it. It never quite, I suppose it's like the first hit. You never can quite make up that first high. And so you're constantly chasing it rather than investing in yourself, defining yourself and how you want to show up in the world. And we talk about wearing masks. It's like we play as actors on a stage, somebody else writing the script. Whereas when we talk about living richly, it's about defining yourself in the world, choosing the kind of life that you want, and then living that out as deliberately, intentionally as you possibly can. But people pleasing, it's almost the direct opposite. It's like, think of it as gravity. You're trying to live your best life and it's pulling you back right into people's expectations.
Well, and I think if we're really honest, it's a lot easier, and anything in life, it's a lot easier to just say yes than to say no. Because when you say no, then you've got to deal with all of the after effects around the implications of saying no, where so many times it's just easier just to, how many times have you as a mom and working full time just saying, yes, okay, I'll do this. Yes, yes, yes. Because it's just so much easier than saying no.
Yeah. It's hard sometimes, I'll just go to the mom role, but like when your kids ask you for stuff, like you want to be there, you want to be present, you want to can you drive me here? It's 11:30 at night.
Sure, I'd love to.
Sure, I'd love to. Really, like, so, right. And there are times where you're going to
Take an Uber.
Yeah, like I'll drive you. But there are times in that balance. And the mom guilt's a thing. I think parent guilt is a thing. I won't just, it's not just moms, but that guilt factor really plays into it.
You're right. I do think there's parent guilt, but it is interesting, and this is what I love about having the two of you on the show, is
that it's finally going to get good. It'll finally be worth watching.
The IQ level has
just right.
We could have told you that from the start, but we tried.
Yeah.
We tried.
But they're really, you're right, because I chuckle because my response often would be with my kids, get an Uber or I'll pay for the Uber, but I'm not going to get you. And there would often be, well, I'm going to ask mom instead of I'm going to ask dad, because I know what dad's going to say. And
Right.
Now that, again, we're generalizing. There's obviously exceptions to that, but that very much is the role that needs to be played. There's the expectation of so much of people pleasing, I think, comes out of the expectation of role. And when we haven't defined, and you said this a bit earlier, Eric, when we haven't defined who we are and what our role, how we show up, someone else will define it for us. And then we fit into whatever that role is. So even as a dad, there's certain expectations that you behave a certain way, you react a certain way. And people pleasing is you find it anytime you fit into the role that others expect you to play, you're people pleasing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for men, what's interesting is again, the gender perspective here is really fascinating to me, and I've spoken to enough men. I mean, thousands of people that we've had conversations with in our coaching business, and a lot of them, the people pleasing comes from a place of deep guilt. Feeling like they've fucked up as a dad, feeling like they've fucked up as a partner, throwing themselves into their work because it's in many ways the only place they feel successful. And they try to show up at home, but so they're giving up. Many men have just given up on themselves and are just, I know that was my story. Like I talk about where people pleasing ultimately, what's the root of it? Because I think we're going to talk about tips and strategies of how people can overcome. But really, you got to get underneath the surface and figure out what is it that is what insecurity, what self-esteem issues, what beliefs are you holding on to that make you so prime, right, for falling into this trap.
The book, The Art of Everyday Assertiveness, was
a
great book. You had recommended to me originally, and what I love about the how that book wraps up is an actual action plan on how to become assertive, to be able to do that.
You have become a bit more of an asshole.
Not an asshole, but assertive.
But isn't it? I use the language deliberately because isn't it funny when you're a people pleaser and you start to now find your own voice? Often that's how the people closest to you. They define it. Yeah, exactly that. What I really liked about in that book, the authors, they talk about the notion of to identify if you're in a situation where you are falling into that trap of people pleasing. He uses the acronym FOG, right? Fear, obligation, and guilt. Love that.
So if you are feeling, you're acting out of a fear of the response of someone else, of what might happen if you don't say yes, all of that. If you're doing it out of an obligation, or you just made reference to guilt, if you're doing it out of a sense of guilt, in all three cases, guaranteed you're doing it for the wrong reason. And you're doing it out of that people pleasing.
Right.
Yeah. And I think for women, when we talk about assertiveness, there's a whole other level that comes up, which is I'm going to assert myself, and women get perceived as she's really bitchy. Like that's the word I'm going to use. She's too aggressive. Why is she speaking her mind? So
who does she think she is?
Right. Like you and I could say the exact same statement in a business meeting in a professional setting, and mine will just get heard differently because I'm female.
Right.
Right.
That's a thing. It's such a thing, right? When we talk about root causes, right? If we can explore that for a minute, because I think we often go and we've talked about right from the beginning, the outset of the Living Richly podcast, we said this is not going to be like the average show. It's not an easy button. We're not going to give you quick hacks and tips and tricks. Yes, we're going to talk about strategies. We're going to talk about the way forward. But often what we're explaining is the very core foundational shit in our lives that actually is the breeding ground, right, for all this negative behavior in our lives, but also offers, where healing comes, the potential for you to redefine yourself. So if we explored that for a minute. So I just talked about how, for me, it was that guilt that I fucked up so much. Like, what about you guys? Like, when you think of some of those foundational issues, what does that provoke for you?
It's worth for me. Self-worth is probably you could say that's the root for so many things, but when you don't feel whole or worthy or complete as you are, you're likely to want to make your surrounding as calm, right? That's a calm environment. If everyone else is happy, you're the peacekeeper, we're good, right? Yeah. So, but that is a worthiness that like who you are is not okay. It's not enough to just be. Right. Yeah. So for me, it's 100% that. It's like, I'm going to make sure everyone else and the whole space around me is good and happy and calm, because then somehow that means it doesn't matter if I'm okay and calm. If you are all okay and calm at the end of the day, then I'm okay.
Yeah.
I think. Right?
or at least that's the story we tell ourselves.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe just a little bit. Yeah. I think self-worth is a good one. I think self-ownership and responsibility would be one for me. I mean, even from a career perspective, being able to do more and be more and climb that corporate ladder. And when I get here, then it'll be okay and I'll be happy. And then when I get here, then I'll be okay. And, it's okay that I've been working 12 hours a day but it's fine. I'm going to get that next promotion. And it's just, as a woman and as a mom, trying to always do more to, feel, I've taken responsibility of my own life and my own career, and look at me like I'm self-starter and self-initiative and all that kind of stuff. But it just ends up burning you more into the ground. And then, hindsight, I look back, 20, 25 years ago and, where did it get me? Of course, like in a good place now, but you start to see how all of that pleasing chips away at you.
And I think that all of these are great. For me, it really started out with a little bit of that self-worth because of all the turmoil and the stuff that I've shared in previous episodes about my life and growing up and all of the stuff that went on. That yearning for community was there, the yearning to belong. And I found that by people pleasing, by keeping other people happy, by focusing on their needs, I felt a belonging. Yeah. And I remember, and I look back on it now as part of the healing process for me. I think I believe in the episode where I share my story, I talk about one of the things that happened was when my mom passed away. Right before she passed away, she had been battling cancer for about 6 years. She wrote letters, kind of goodbye letters to my sister, my brother, and I. And my letter, there was a section in there that I got so angry about when I first read it. And her intentions were good, of course, but she wrote in there about how I don't need to worry about you because you always take care of everyone. You always look after everyone. You're the peacekeeper was the language she used. And I remember for a lot of years that became an identity for me.
Right.
You were one of the first people, you and Trevor were individuals who started to challenge even that language when I would use that language in conversations, right? I
still remember a very difficult conversation that we were having around some issues that we were sorting through. And it was hard for me to do it because the people pleaser in me didn't want to say this to you. But I remember saying to you, I don't need you to be the peacemaker right now. I need you to show up and say what I need to say, say what you need to say.
Exactly. And so I think that was, it became, I mean, it was obviously such a core part of my personality that literally in her dying words, that would be something my mother would identify me as.
Yeah.
So it was such and we talk about, again, this, none of this is easy. This journey, it's hard fucking work to do this.
Yeah.
And I'm not there. I would say of any area of the Living Richly that I still find myself, I debate or challenge, I'm a way better. There's oftentimes, Wendy and I'll have conversations and she'll even say, are you sure? I want to make sure that you're okay with this and you're not just doing it because, I would like she's very good at checking in on my motives, which I so deeply appreciate when she does that. But I'm so much better now, but it's still an area that I can fall into as a challenge is going back into, I got to keep other people happy here and doesn't matter if it means I'm not happy.
Well, on that note, would you go get us all a cup of coffee?
Please.
No.
Yes.
And a snack.
Yeah.
Snack.
And some Baileys and
But do you know what I love about what you said when you said to Rob back then, I don't need you to be this? And I love that so much, because those are the kinds of people that you need in your life when you start to say no to things that don't serve you. So I'm going to talk from a female perspective. There's always judgment, and people start to kind of navigate and weave their way out of your life because all of a sudden you're not the same person. So I love that having somebody like Eric to say, I don't need you to be this right now. I need you to be this, coming at it from a front. Those are the kinds of people that we need in our corner. And for you and I, when I'm in so we're very similar in terms of saying yes, all the things that we've talked about.
Could you get us a cup of coffee?
Hell no. But I love
this
that.
Isn't working.
Eric, go give me a coffee.
Okay.
But I love that you will call me to the carpet, so to speak. Not talking about that, by the way. That's wrong choice of words.
Another show.
Another show.
On Living Richly.
But you'll be very open and transparent with me, and those are the kinds of people that you need in your corner, are the ones to ask you those difficult questions when you know other people won't.
Right. And it's when it's coming from someone where, like, Rob and I have known each other a long time, like a dearest friend, the trust level is so high, but I still knew that in that moment, it took a lot for me to say it. Right. But I knew that you would receive it in the right spirit. But this is the whole point of, like, it was Ken Blanchard who many decades ago wrote in his book, The 1 Minute Manager, that feedback is the breakfast of champions. And in our growth journey, without having that feedback, that the people in our lives that make us feel safe and loved and accepted as we are, and yet are willing, and have been invited to kind of give us that reflective feedback when we need it, I think we continue to fly blind a lot.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think, saying no it's hard, right? When you start saying no, it's really hard. And you talk about having a good community of people around you. I think it's when you say no to the people, those, like, if you're saying no and those people stay and they don't give you a hard time and they don't shame you about saying no, then those are your people. The people that have a hard time with you saying no aren't your people.
Exactly.
That's not the community you want around.
Yeah.
So good. There's enough shame going around.
Yeah, there's enough.
Right?
There is. Yeah. But your circle should always want to see you win.
Yes.
And they should always clap for you regardless of what your decisions are. And if they're not, then it's time for a new circle.
Yeah.
Which can be really hard especially if you've had people in your life for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
But it is, and it's always interesting to me when we, you go back, this is episode 40.
Wow.
Right.
Crazy.
And so when you go back over the 40 episodes, the 39 episodes before this one, the recurring themes that we find that show up that are absolutely essential to living richly, community is one of those themes.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to healing of yourself of the people pleasing, challenge, community plays such a critical role in that. And having the right people who will call you out and will stay when you say no, when you just see who those people are, and it becomes so important and so critical to have them in your life.
Absolutely. And I think our closest relationships is where this gets the toughest, right? I know for me, in my previous love relationships, like romantic relationships, or with my kids or with my friends, this is where it is the scariest, right? Because as you begin to take those steps, I've talked openly in the show about my, everybody leaves me. That was a superscript, that I'm a freak and I'm different than everybody else, and that I don't deserve the grace and love. And as soon as people get to know me, they're going to take off. So for me, in my personal relationships, the closest ones, there was so much fear that if I don't keep you happy, if I don't do what I know is going to make you, fill your cup, you're going to leave. And as I began to work on that and make some headway, what was interesting is to watch relationships shift. And some shifted right out of my life. Yeah. And that is hard, but you got to ask yourself, what's harder? It's hard. You said it's hard fucking work when you start to work on this stuff and start to look at yourself and make those tough decisions to begin to shift and evolve. But it's even harder to live your entire life out of fear, obligation, guilt.
Yeah.
Right?
And I love that you just shared that. We talked about this kind of offline one time as we were just looking at the podcast and kind of where the conversations have gone. And it's been always interesting to me because we talk about past relationships and that when we started to really lean into the living richly, how those relationships shifted. One of the things that what we've talked about offline is at no point do we shift the blame and say it's the other person's fault. In fact, we look again because we own this.
We attracted it because of what we were putting out into the world,
and we weren't being fair to these individuals when we weren't being our true authentic self. When that shows up, and I think that it's why I'm sharing, kind of pointing that out, is it's important for people to understand when you start to show up authentically, when you start to say no, when you stop the cycle of people pleasing, there will be individuals in your life that will leave. It's not their fault. They're not bad for doing it. It's because you are finally demonstrating who you truly are, and some people are not going to connect to that.
Yeah, you've fundamentally changed the dance, right? You were
Don't be
doing
upset with your dance partner when you change the dance.
Well, that's it. You were doing the waltz before. Now you're dancing the tango, and either that's going to work itself out, or it's not. But I think that fear of losing important people in our lives, or people, period, is a big factor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Giving yourself permission to put your needs first. I mean, that's a really big statement. So to actually be able to put your needs first is maybe one of the hardest things. When you talk about people pleasing, it's for some, whatever underlying root cause, you don't feel like that's okay.
Yeah.
Whatever that is for you, you've somehow set up that story.
Yeah.
So starting to give yourself permission to do that is so hard. And that first no is maybe the hardest.
Well, let's talk about saying no for a minute, because it's it's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard. I want to also talk about the I'm sorry thing, but
I want to talk about you doing the tango. I'm still thinking about that.
That's a different show.
We're not doing that today.
So many shows to come.
There is no show where you do the tango.
I'm going to talk to our producer. I think I could get it slotted in. Right, Steve?
Hey,
He's here. But why is it so hard? We've talked about a number of reasons, but let's explore that further. Because often when you do some research on, I need to stop people pleasing. Well, you need to start saying no more. Yeah, I can intellectually wrap my head around that, but it's not the head that's the problem here. It's the heart, it's the beliefs, it's all the stuff under the surface. Why is it so hard to say no?
Well, and so I would say because saying no is not the first step. And
go ahead and turn this on a dime.
Right. And when we
Can you go back to people pleasing and peacemaking?
No. When we start at first step is to say no. I think we missed the point. You've got to the first step, and Kate, you already alluded to it. The first step is recognizing your own worth, recognizing that you are important, your needs are important, you matter.
Radical self-acceptance, right?
Another running theme. And it has to start there. And that's why I think so many people fail at this, and why when they say no, they say it in the wrong way.
Right.
They say it in a way that comes across as attacking somebody, or as in, adversarial, whatever, because they haven't started with where the first step is radical self-acceptance. When you are coming out of radical self-acceptance, your reasoning for saying no changes, and how you then present that no to someone else changes as well.
No, 100%.
Well, and part of it is so saying it as where it can come across as an attack, but we often say no with an apology attached to it.
No, I'm sorry.
But right, with an apology or a but. So I think such a good point around figuring out like what your radical self-acceptance, self-worth, like why is it important to you? And then learning to not have to justify. And as women, and I know it's the same for men as well, but I'm just speaking on a mom behalf, always trying to give a reason as to why we can't do it. Instead of just saying, no, it's no, but, or I'm sorry, but, and how do we take away that attachment from that and be assertive in what our decisions are?
And being comfortable, like I know with my kids, sometimes I've used with one kid in particular, I won't point them out, but I have used.
Let's guess.
It's like,
let's guess.
So
Probably me.
But
I'm like the other child in the equation.
That's true. Fair. But sometimes I'm like, no, it's just no. Like it's just no. And then, but that never lands, right? And then there's all this debate. I'm like, no, sometimes it's just no. I don't need to rationalize it to you. I don't need to explain it to you. It's just no. But then I can go away and mom guilt kicks in and I'm like, oh God, like I could have figured that out, or I could have done it. And so also being firm after to be like, no, like it was okay for you to say no. I think sometimes in the moment you can get really passionate about it, and then afterwards you're sort of like you second guess it, but you have to stay strong all the way through.
And I'll also add on to that being a single mom as well, because you're saying no, and you know, for me being a single mom, sometimes it's still in the back of my head. Should I say yes? Just not to be the favorite parent, but, you know, are they going to ask dad for something else? So it's not that it's not the same if you're, the family's together, but I do find I struggle with mom guilt around saying no. Oh, maybe I'll just say yes.
Right.
Well, and like on that, depending on custody, like I have week on, week off with my kids. When I have them, I feel that I'm all in when I have them, right? I can be not all in when they're with their dad, but when I have them, I feel like I need to show up as this like big, amazing
super mom.
Yes.
Yes.
Week on, week off.
Right.
It's a lot.
But it's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Well, you think about expectations, right? We hold these I love how Sherry will often ask me the question when I'm wrestling with something, you know, is that expectation, Eric, in line with reality? And so we hold ourselves to the super dad, super mom. We hold ourselves to these expectations that are unrealistic and then feel a need to do it. And whether it's at home, or I mean, for some, it may not be at home so much. Maybe it's the people pleaser at work who constantly is just taking on more work as the boss heaps it on because they don't want to let somebody down. This fear of letting other people down, this fear of disappointment, this fear of they're going to think less of me, reinforces the need that it's actually not what people think of us that matters most. And I know this is going to be easy to say, but this is where the work lies, I'm convinced, is when I know who I am. When I have, right, we talk about your defining of self. Who am I? What matters to me? How do I want to show up in the world? When we get a sense of that, then I think this stuff becomes much easier to overcome. Right.
I love, again, going back to that book, The Art of Everyday Assertiveness, which I think is,
we'll put that in the show notes for sure.
It is it's the Bible of this subject for sure. And I've seen it is the other thing that is introduced in there that I have embraced. I've got it in my notes as a separate note as a reminder, and that's your personal Bill of Rights.
Right. It's so good.
And there's a number of them in there, right? I have a right to say no.
Right.
I have a right to be wrong.
Yeah.
I have a right to change my mind.
Yeah.
And it's interesting not how often, because it hasn't happened a lot. It has happened where I found myself in a conversation with someone and I'll refer to the Bill of Rights. I'll say, well, actually, I have a right to change my mind. I remember something around somebody one time, they were kind of making fun and joking because I got a dog, and you said you're never going to get another dog, and now you got a dog. I said, yeah, I have a right to change my mind. And that was, and it was like, and they didn't have anything to say. They were like,
liberating.
oh, I guess you do. Right? Like,
So
I changed my
liberating.
mind. It's okay. And sometimes, and so embracing that and creating that Bill of Rights is such a healthy piece of finally being free of this syndrome of people pleasing.
Absolutely. And let's talk about this sorry thing, shall we?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry,
I'm
what?
sorry, what? I'm sorry. I'd like to introduce a new topic, perhaps, that we might explore. But let's face it. I know we, as Canadians, it comes more naturally to us. I mean, we're kind of, it's kind of a self-deprecating thing we say all the time. And yet I came to realize at some point last year, I remember having this conversation with you, is that every time we say, I'm sorry, as a matter of fact, if any one of us starts to track how often we say it in a day, we might be shocked how often we use it. We use it in emails, we use it in texts, we use it in conversation. And every time we say, I'm sorry, we're apologizing for how we're showing up in the world. And I would say about 75%, if not more, of the times we say, I'm sorry, there's no reason to be sorry. This is not a sorry moment. What do you guys think about that?
Well, that's one thing you say often, actually, because
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, Rob, I'm still waiting on that cup of coffee.
Oh, sucks to be you. Is that better?
Much better.
it's so habitual, though.
Yeah.
And we say it without thinking. And I think over the years, like for my own personal growth, I think I've done a decent job at being more assertive in who I am, what I want, what I deserve, but I still catch myself, and you're great at this, especially in text, where I'll say, I'm sorry, da 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 da, and you'll say, but you have nothing to be sorry about. There's nothing to be sorry about. And then I'll think, right.
Yeah.
But it's so
what's so interesting is, or not interesting because you guys are close, but Eric always says, no sorries required in my text back. You do that all the time because I'm always like, oh, sorry. Like, sorry I didn't get back to you, or sorry. He's like, no sorries required. Always.
Yeah. It was an exercise. I began to actually track how often I was saying it. And over the course of several months, it almost disappeared. It's almost disappeared from my vocabulary now. I still slip up from time to time, and then I just apologize.
I apologize.
I'm sorry for saying sorry. Wah, wah, wah. No, but I literally am, even in my, having to reschedule a meeting, something as simple as rescheduling a meeting with a client, right? And the leading phrase, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah. How about thank you for your flexibility and understanding? Yeah. Change the language, because I am convinced we talk about the power of the mind. We talk about the power of language and how words are the language of belief. And when we articulate into the, externally, when we say it out loud is what I was just trying to say there. When we say it out loud, our subconscious registers that language and says, you did something wrong.
Yeah, you take your power back when you stop using it. Yeah. You truly do.
I love that.
Yeah, I recently was just dealing with something personal, and I didn't feel the need to apologize. And I think we talked about this, but I always over rotate, and I'm always the one who over apologizes to be the peacekeeper, right? So that's how I show up. And I just decided that I wasn't going to. And it was amazing how strong I felt afterwards, because it wasn't on me to make the situation better. I was very clear on my intent and my position, and not once did I use the language, I'm sorry, not once. Yeah. And it was empowering though, because you get your power back.
I love that language.
Yeah.
It is freeing.
It is freeing.
It is freeing when you can get to that point. So how do we get to that point?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about strategies. Like I just talked about the I'm sorry piece. That's one I continue to work on. But what are some things you guys are currently working on, or like have worked on, that have been useful to you or helpful to you in overcoming people pleasing?
I have a few. We all have like 9 things to say.
We're like all looking at each other.
We're all like, who's gonna go? I'll go. Okay. Pause. Someone asked you to go somewhere or do something or take on a new piece of work, or your kids ask you something, just pause. Don't say yes. Don't say no. Take a minute and think about sort of the why, right? So like, okay, is this going to affect me? We feel this immediacy to be like, yes, no, maybe, I don't know. And maybe it's not an answer. So just pause and take the time to think about, is this something that you really want to do.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah.
I was going to add is examine your motives.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and you need the pause to do that. So I love that you started with that is in that pause to be able to reflect. Do I want to what's my gut reaction? Do I want to say yes? Do I want to say no? Am I interested in this? Not examine your motives before you then respond. I love that.
And I think a great lens to use to do that is, am I doing this out of fear, obligation, and guilt? Is there a should, must, or have to attached to this? And if I'm sensing that, I better pause even more and think twice about my answer, because chances are I'm doing it for the wrong reasons.
And if there's a get to, then you do. See what I did there? Drop that
Even
one.
better.
Nice.
For more, check out Get 2 Months.
Shameless.
Right.
But,
Shameless plug.
but if it becomes I get to, then that's a positive. It's not a have to. It's I get to. Oh, I'm excited. Okay. That's a yes.
I want to do
want
this
to
as
do this.
opposed to I feel I need to do this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That the pausing is great. I think, especially in today's society, we are such an instant gratification society where a text comes through. Why do we need to respond right away? Why do we need to answer right away? Which is interesting because
Anybody apologize for I didn't answer you within 2 minutes? I'm sorry.
Sorry for the delayed response is
I
my
said this
classic
10 minutes
line.
ago, right?
Yeah. But it's funny when I don't respond right away, if one of my kids is texting me, one in particular,
If you're listening. Stop that shit.
But especially if I'm in the middle of teaching a class, I can't respond right away, but then I'll get the mom, hello, mom.
Well, Rob and I do that to each other. We're doing it on purpose.
So familiar.
Phones, yeah.
But yeah, not having to respond right away. And then oftentimes in my head, I will categorize on a scale of 1 to 10. How do I feel about whatever's being asked of me? Whether it's, hey, friends who want to go out for dinner, or somebody asking me something at work. How do I feel about this on a scale of 1 to 10? And then I'll revisit it in a couple of hours, because I don't need, nothing is going to fall apart in a couple of hours. And then I'll revisit where I am on a scale of 1 to 10 and decide and I use that fog analogy quite often, especially after reading the book. I find that really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, again, being very mindful to say that no is a perfectly acceptable answer, right? That it doesn't require, and I think this is something I have so much learning. I feel like I'm a complete novice at this one, because if it's a no, I feel this need to tell a story about why I can't do it and defend my position. Not even defend. Defend's the wrong word. But
justify.
I need to justify. Thank you. Justify the fact that I'm saying no because I feel so terrible. Right. I don't know if you guys struggle with that as well.
Yeah. And I think we lie too.
Sorry.
We make up excuses. We lie all the time. We're like, no, sorry, my aunt's in the hospital. We all do it because we don't feel.
Your aunt died last month.
Right. No,
she came back to life. It was incredible. She came back to life, and now she's in the hospital.
It was in the National Enquirer.
Yeah. I think another one is be okay that you can't control the other person's
love
response.
That, Rob.
You don't carry the weight of how they respond to your no.
Be responsible for yourself and to others. You are responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions, reactions, and decisions. You are not responsible for somebody else's. And I know that was a groundbreaking sort of revolutionary shift in my thinking when I realized that I'm responsible to you, to treat you with respect, treat you the way that I would expect to be treated, but I'm not ultimately responsible for how you feel based on my decision to perhaps say no.
Yeah. And I think that there are situations. Listen, I don't think there's anything wrong with, with a friend, a loved one. They ask you if you can do something, and you say no, and you give them a bit of a reason why. It's not as I hear what you're saying earlier about justifying it. I think sometimes it's helpful for them, to be able to explain, here, I'm choosing not to do this because I've got something else on, or I've been going too busy right now. I'm really tired. I'm not really interested in going out. There are other times, though, and I think because we think they have to justify, we do that all the time. There are times when you can just say, no, well, how come? We really want you to come out. Just really not interested in going to that. I'm going to choose to not. and to be able to end it with that conversation. So it's a learning curve for me as well, that there are times when I feel like it's kindness to give some more explanation as to why you're saying no, so that they're not misinterpreting it from a different perspective. But at the end, if they trust me and they know that I'm committed to them, they'll understand if I'm saying no and I'm not giving a reason, they'll think the best for me anyway.
Well, I love how you drew that distinction that not everything that we do is people pleasing. And some people pleasing is not bad if it's motivated out of a get to, or I want to. I love doing stuff for you. I love making you happy, right? Well, that's not an obligation. It's not done out of fear. It's done out of love. It's done out of affection. Now, if I was negating my own self in that process. And I think this happens a lot in relationships where people lose themselves in the other person, and they almost become like a carbon copy of the other. They abandon their own pursuits, their own hobbies, their own thinking in order to fit in. I think that's where we're moving into some negative territory. Yeah. But I think, listen, kindness, acts of love, this is to be encouraged. Just check your motives and make sure you're not losing yourself in the process.
Yeah. And I think you can hold each other accountable as couples. Like there's lots of times, because you are very generous and you do a lot of really nice things. But I'm
not getting Rob coffee.
No, but that's Rob. That's Rob.
Hard
you
no.
will.
Hard, you will.
But we check in. Like I'll be like, are you sure you're okay with that? Like I'll always check in, and I'm like, I'm okay, or it's not. And you always say, no, that makes me happy. I'm like, okay. But we do check in with each other to make sure that, like, because I know your tendency can be to over rotate. So I'm like, are you sure? Like, is it good? So we do that. And I think holding each other accountable is good too.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that. We're going to talk about boundaries on the next show. I mean, boundaries is a huge part of breaking free from people pleasing. So we're to save that subject for the next episode on the importance of setting boundaries. But in the closing moments of our show, final thoughts from each of you about people and overcoming this. What advice would you give? What closing words would you want to give to our audience today?
I think, people ask me this all the time, especially with events that have gone on in my life over the last few years. And the best thing I can say is it's practice. It takes practice. There's no easy button. There's no easy way around learning how to do this. Your mind is like a muscle. It's no different than if you're training a body part in a gym. The more you do it, the stronger you become at being more assertive, but in a way where you're still projecting kindness, but it's practice. So practicing with small things to say no, and that will eventually then lead to the bigger things.
Yeah. But yeah. And I to add on to that, just start.
Yeah.
Right. Just start. Just, practice starts with one no, right? And see how it feels. And then be kind to yourself. It's going to feel yucky. It's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel like you're likely letting someone down or you're disappointing someone. So be kind. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it's important to remind yourself that you matter. You matter.
You fucking matter.
Get in front of a mirror, look at yourself in the mirror, and tell the person that you're looking at, you matter. Your needs matter. Your wants matter. How you show up matters. Your authenticity matters. That is for the first step to being free of the pleasing other people, of always saying yes, even when you want to say no, is getting to that point. Start to believe. Tell yourself over and over and over again until it starts to sink in just a little bit that you matter.
Yeah, I think the day you quit being the general manager of the universe will be your most happiest day ever, where you just give up. You just surrender the need to please other people and live as a slave to other people's expectations, other people's definitions of how you should show up. At the very foundation of living richly, who do I want to be in the world, right? And then pursuing that. This has been such a great conversation. Looking forward so much to the conversation that we're going to have next on the next show on setting boundaries, because it's such a big part of what we do. We want to thank you for tuning in today. We want to encourage you to visit our website at livingrichly.me/act, ACT, where you'll find all kinds of resources and all the show notes and everything else can be found there on the website, so that you can follow through, including the book that we talked about today, the Art of Everyday Assertiveness.
Yeah, and we want to encourage you to to share this episode. And most importantly, one of the things we want to encourage you to do is check out our Instagram page. You'll find that livingrichly.me. We provide all kinds of short clips from these episodes that you can kind of have little snacks. When you want to have a Living Richly snack, you can check out the Instagram page, and there's all kinds of great reels and stuff that you can have. You can look at, you can share. Great way to get these clips, the little clips of some of the main talking points of our episodes.
And finally, if you're looking for some help on this front, we do offer coaching programs and services where if you're looking for some one-to-one or group support, feel free to reach out to us, and you can ping us at right off the website, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Want to thank Kate, Wendy, and Rob for a great conversation today, and looking forward to our next one. And thank you, Living Richly Nation, for dialing in today and listening in, and we look forward to seeing you on the next show.